Hey everybody, and welcome back for part 3 of our complete Power BI build walkthrough. In video 1, we spent some time in the Power Query editor going through some general techniques for transforming the data. In video 2, we just spent some time laying out some very basic data visuals. We didn't spend a lot of time formatting them. I tried to keep the amount of DAX that we had to write to an absolute minimum, but I did show you how to set up a measure table and how to write a few very basic DAX expressions for the movie data set that we're working with. If you'll remember, the report that we created was still in pretty rough shape as far as we just sort of slapped some data visuals together. And we didn't spend a lot of time focusing on our layout or how we're presenting the data visuals. We just kind of let the default options and settings for Power BI, we just kind of let that ride. So in this video, in video 3, I'm going to be bouncing back and forth between Power BI and PowerPoint, showing you how to sort of tie together a theme and a layout across your report using a single color scheme in PowerPoint and Power BI, and how to carefully format your data visuals in sort of a minimalist approach to create a Power BI report that looks very clean, very simple, and very effective in presenting the type of data that's in your report. So this is going to be probably a pretty long video, but we're going to be focusing on a lot of formatting techniques for some of the most common visuals in Power BI. And I'm going to be spending a lot of time just showing you, how to set up a layout that presents a lot of information effectively without feeling like everything's crowded and just sort of jammed together. We want to make sure that all of our reports are highly readable and that the different pages in our report sort of flow in a very logical manner. So let's go ahead and hop back over to Power BI so that we can remember where we left off with our data visuals from video 2. So we've already created our Power BI report, at least the bones and the structure of it. We've got all of our tabs already set up down here. We've got at least some ideas for some visuals sort of thrown up on each page. A lot of redundancy, a lot of very similar visuals across the report that are approaching the same questions but from different perspectives. A lot of that's totally fine for this sort of simple Power BI report that we're trying to build from this movie database. So now it's time to open up PowerPoint and figure out how to start making this look a lot more attractive. And then, of course, in the final video in this series, we're going to start talking about some, next level things to sort of improve the interactivity of this report, sort of make it feel like a more finished web tool instead of just a bunch of pages of random data visuals. But for now, let's focus on the design. Let's focus on making this thing look as attractive as we can make it. I'm going to go ahead and open up PowerPoint and select a blank presentation. I'm going to go ahead and remove these text boxes, anything that I don't need. I'm going to open up my design ribbon here in my format background options. And I'm just going to go ahead and open up my background colors to show you the default palette that we're working with in PowerPoint. A lot of fairly, in my opinion, bland colors. These are not the colors that I'm intending to actually use in Power BI. I'm looking for something up here in the different themes that's just going to help me, design something that's a little bit more dynamic. As I scroll through some of these different palettes, you'll see, palettes like integral, that are mostly just blues and greens. So there's not a whole lot that I can do with those colors to be more dynamic from a data visualization perspective. So I'm not looking for something like that. There's some colors here that have a lot of kind of like earth tones. Those are probably pretty bland to work with. Lots of like browns and oranges. I'm really looking for a color palette that has a nice combination of some cooler tones and warmer tones so that I can sort of build that dynamism in my colors, in my layout, and my theme in Power BI. And so I'm kind of looking at dividend, and I'm looking over here at this Ion boardroom. Let's go ahead and select that theme. Your designer might pop up here, gives you some options that would be great if we were making PowerPoint. Obviously, we don't need that here, so I'm just going to see if I can close out of this. We also don't need this background image that PowerPoint inserts automatically, for some of these other themes. And so I'm just going to go ahead and hide the background image. All I'm interested in keeping are the colors here. And so, I've got this nice kind of dark purple. I've got overall a pretty warm palette, but I've got a nice combination of some purple, some oranges. At the end of the day, this might not be a color palette that I'd work with a whole lot in Power BI, but just because I feel like I haven't used this in too many other Power BI designs, let's go ahead and see if we can make this work. I'm kind of liking these colors today. So, we know that our Power BI report has 5 tabs: landing, summary, genre, directors, actors, and writers. We can go ahead and, create 5 different slides for our layout. Again, we're going to want to hide the background graphics and all of those. I'm going to go ahead and select everything, all 5 slides. I'm going to give them kind of a gray background. And I am going to go ahead and start setting up, some of the core features of my layout. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create kind of a header at the top, which is going to contain the name of my report and the name of each tab that I'm building. So I'm going to go ahead and make this kind of a dark purple. You can see it's got kind of a pink outline on it. I don't need that outline, so I'm just going to remove that. I'm going to copy and paste that rectangle. And all I'm doing is just creating a very, very tiny rectangle that I'm going to use as kind of a drop shadow effect. And that's all looking pretty decent to me. If you also want to add a footer or something, hey, no big deal. You do you. Let's go ahead and add something there. And if you even want to give kind of a shadow effect to that, no problem. Let's go up here to our formatting options. I'm going to make this kind of a lighter gray. But we've at least got kind of a header and a footer going here. Let's go ahead and add some text boxes to start filling in some of our core information. Let's call the title of this report Movie Database Report. I don't like Century Gothic particularly as my font here. It takes up a lot of room. So I'm going to go ahead and change this to, let's try font shrift. I'm going to go with condensed. Got room to make that a little bit larger. I'm going to go ahead and kind of drop that into place over here. I'm going to make the base font white. If you aren't exactly happy with how things looked, I like to pick a font that has some other options to it. I'm actually going to try the light condensed. Still not liking how that's looking. Sometimes you just have to kind of trial and error until you find something that looks pretty good. And if you decide to scrap it entirely, that can be your little secret. But I think I'm going to stick with font shrift. And I think I'm just going to go ahead and go with the font shrift condensed. I think it looked better than the other options I was kind of playing with. And this first tab is just going to be summary. And just to sort of offset the name of the tab from the name of the report, I'm going to go ahead and give that an additional kind of pop of color. Let's go with this kind of orange color here. If you want to make it just a little bit brighter, that's also something you can do. Overall, pretty content with how that looks. We're not trying to go for perfection here. We're just trying to quickly create a layout for our Power BI report. And at the bottom, I'm going to just give myself credit for designing this Power BI report. Let's go ahead and shrink down that font a little bit. I'll go ahead and drop my credit down here in the bottom right corner. I'm not going to go full black on this. I'm just going to make it kind of this very dark gray. And if we want to add just like a touch of personality or something, we can always go to like uxwing.com, look for some icons that sort of fit our movie theme. Let's go through here and just kind of look and see what different options we've got. Obviously a lot of cameras. We've got some ticket stubs here. Today I'm feeling like maybe I want to try this cinema icon. So I'm just going to go ahead and grab that icon over here. I'm going to go ahead and drop that into my report. Maybe put that in the top right corner there. I think all of that's looking pretty good. Again, my goal here is to keep things super, super lean, super, super simple. Once I've got all of those objects sort of laid out on the page, the next thing that I'm going to do is just copy and paste all of my layout items onto the other tabs. This next page is going to be genre, followed by directors, followed by actors, followed by writers. And once I've got all of my pages set up in PowerPoint, I'm just going to go to Save As. I'm going to find my movie data walkthrough. I'm going to open that up. I should have a folder for my backgrounds. I'm going to save all of these as PNGs. And change the title to backgrounds. Let's go ahead and save. I'm going to save all slides to that new backgrounds folder that I just created. Power BI is going to have to, or PowerPoint's going to have to think for just a second while it saves everything. And when it finishes, there's going to be a pop-up saying that every slide in the presentation has been saved to a new folder. So I'm just going to go ahead and minimize this for now. I'm going to go ahead and head to my first canvas background. I'm going to set the transparency to 0. I'm going to browse for a background image. I'm going to go to my backgrounds folder and the backgrounds folder that was just created by PowerPoint. And I'm going to grab my first slide. I'm going to set the image to fit. And you can see I've now got my summary background image in place. And I just need to kind of refit and reformat all of these visuals so that they fit, perfectly into this allotted area, which is fine. We'll work on that in just a moment. I'm going to head over to my genres page. I'm going to set my transparency to 0 in my canvas background. I'm going to browse for an image. I'm going to grab slide 2. And I'm just quickly going to go through and add my background images for each slide. And I'm done. So now every single page in my report has a background layout. Now it's time to just sort of start organizing and formatting all of our visuals so that we can make this look as attractive as possible. The first thing that I'm going to need to do, however, is I'm going to need to bring over my color palette from PowerPoint over to Power BI. Because if I go over to my background settings and if I click on color, notice that I'm still using Power BI's default color palette, which is not what I want to be using. So I'm going to go ahead and head over to my View tab in my ribbon. I'm going to drop this down by clicking on this arrow, and I'm going to customize the current theme, which is how I'm going to change the colors that are included in my Power BI palette. So a quick way of doing this is just to quickly, throw a bunch of rectangles onto your page. You're going to need about, 7 or 8 of them. Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 technically. So let's go ahead and just grab those. We're going to distribute them horizontally. So I've got currently 7, which means I'm going to need 1 more. I'm going to go ahead and align those to the top. And now I'm just going to go through these one at a time. Select the different colors in my palette. And I'm going to go ahead and go to more colors. I'm going to grab the hex code over here for my first color, switch back over to Power BI, just going to copy and paste that code there. Then I'm going to hop back over to PowerPoint and grab my next color, head back over to Power BI, copy and paste it there, head back to PowerPoint, go to my next little box here, grab more colors, grab my hex code, copy and paste it. You can see I've got 5 more to go. I'm just rinsing and repeating the same process, so I'm just going to go ahead and pause the tutorial while I finish doing the other 5. And once I've finished, I've got all of the same colors in Power BI that I'm using over here in PowerPoint. I can go ahead and delete all of these squares when I'm done. If you want to spot check how your palette looks in PowerPoint, apply your palette in Power BI, and just confirm visually that everything looks the same. Then you are good to go. You're working with the same colors in your layout in PowerPoint that you're working with in Power BI, which is going to make it so much easier to sort of preserve the overall look and feel and aesthetic of the report as you work. So let's go ahead and start, making the most out of our space here. I've got 3 fairly large bar charts over here and 6 metrics that I'm working with. So I'm actually going to align all of my metrics here vertically, which means I'm going to have to sort of resize everything on the fly. Let's go ahead and use Control and Select to multi-select all of our cards up here. And currently our font size is maxed out. Let's go ahead and drop that down to a much easier to work with 30. Let's go ahead and set our display units to none for everything. That's looking pretty decent. Now our cards are still pretty tall. We've got to be able to cram about 6 of these into this space here. So I'm just going to do a shortcut by going to General over here in my properties. And instead of a 133 height, you can start just kind of, clicking and manually, shrinking these down. Or if you want to, you can just set everything to about 80. It looks like like my G over here on average, some of the letters might get cut off if you go too short. And it also looks like, my audience count is taking up a lot of room relative to everything else. But let's go ahead and make these just a little bit more narrow as well. I've now cut off my audience count a little bit. That's no problem. Since it's such a big number, I'm actually going to go up here and set this to auto and see what it comes up. It looks like I've got about 2 billion. So I'm going to go ahead and add 2 more decimal places there. If you want to play around with whether or not you like billions or millions more, hey, that's absolutely fine. I'm actually going to keep it on billions, but I'm going to keep 2 decimal places. And now I'm going to kind of just drag everything back into the proper order. I'm actually going to put average RT score first. I'm going to drag critic count below that. I'm going to then put my audience score and my audience count and then average runtime at the bottom. Next, I'm going to Control Select everything again, and I'm going to finish formatting all of these. So I'm going to go up to Format. I'm going to make sure that everything is perfectly aligned to the center, and I'm going to distribute these vertically so that the spaces between each card, all of the cards is identical. You can kind of move these into position. Next, I'm going to just very, very quickly go to my general effects setting. I'm going to go ahead and leave my background on. I'm going to add a visual border to these with 10 pixel rounded corners. You can see the effect that that had. I've now got rounded corners on all of these cards. And instead of using a black border, I'm honestly just going to make this kind of a light gray so that it's barely noticeable. And that's looking pretty good to me. If you want to add a pop of color here for your main KPIs, I'll leave that up to you. Maybe you just want to see what it looks like with the purple from your palette. I don't find any of that too terribly offensive. I'm noticing that my G on average RT score is still cut off a little bit. So if you need to fix things like that on the fly, just Control Select everything, head back to your properties, try bumping, your height up just a little bit, and then you can always play with the spacing a little bit, go back to Format, distribute everything vertically, That's looking pretty good. Now I've got the rest of this area here left to sort of play with my data visuals a little bit and see, how I can better utilize all of the space that I've got here. It looks like if I really, really wanted to, I could even possibly squeeze in an additional visual here. So let's go ahead and head back over to our data and see what might make sense. Looks like studio name is a field that I haven't used. So let's see if we can use this studio name field. I know there's going to be a lot of studios here. Not sure how it's going to look. Not too terrible. Next thing we're going to do is just format these bar charts one at a time to make them look the way that we want them to look. This first visual, if you'll remember, is taking the top 50 movies based on the number of audience reviews, and it's ranking them by the average RT score. So maybe we want to continue to refine the titles of some of these. Let's go ahead and see, maybe we want to call this, pose a question to the reader. What are, or how are the critical reviews for the top 50 films based on audience size? We want to be as descriptive as possible with our titles so that somebody who's reading this knows exactly what they're looking at. Next, we're going to go ahead and remove anything from the formatting of this visual that we don't need. Like, we don't need movie title as a y-axis title. It should be obvious based on the title here that we're looking at movies, and it should be, maybe we want to leave average score so that people know that we're looking at critical reviews. Maybe we want to give this even a different title to make it a little bit clearer. But let's just go ahead and change up the formatting a little bit. I'm going to go to my visual here. I'm going to go to my y-axis settings first, and I'm going to turn off the title since I don't really need it. Next, I'm going to go to my x-axis, and I'm going to change the title to average critical score out of 100. Now that I've specified that, I'm going to go ahead and get rid of my x-axis entirely, and I'm going to add data labels to all of these bars so that people can actually see, the specific scores that were given. And I'm not going to need the decimal place for these since basically the critical scores can only be whole numbers. There's no need for the decimal. I'm going to go ahead and set this to a DIN font, which for me is just a little bit more readable as a data label. And I'm going to go ahead and turn on my overflow in case I need it. Now I'm going to go ahead and focus on my bars here. And I'm going to go ahead and make sure that I'm pulling the right formula for my conditional formatting. Currently it's looking at count of movie title, which is useless. It's going to be 1 for every single movie. So I want to go to my measures and make sure that I'm grabbing the correct measure, which what I want is average RT score. If you want to add a middle gradient, that's fine. But the goal here is to really accentuate the top movies here. So for my middle value, I'm just going to go ahead and let it be gray, or my lowest value and my middle value. And if you want to play with your coloring a little bit here, let's go ahead and see what it looks like with purple. Power BI is going to automatically create this legend here, which I, personally don't think is extremely helpful. And you can kind of see how the gradient is created. The gradient is kind of lost because of the size of the visual. That's fine. Maybe since we know that the scale for these movies is 0 to 100 for the average RT score, you can also do something like manually setting, don't show me color until we get into, like 90 out of 100. And maybe you also want to see what it looks like with orange. Finding that orange a little overpowering for my taste. But you can just kind of sit around, play with the coloring a little bit. I like to just kind of experiment with all of the major colors. Honestly, the purple I think is serving its purpose fine. The orange is just a little bit loud for my tastes. We'll go back to general, and all I'm doing here is I'm just adding the same effect to my visuals that I added to my cards over here. Again, this is just my own stylistic preference. It's not like you're doing anything wrong if you use, straight corners on your visuals, but I'm just going to continue to use the rounded corners that I like and use quite a bit. Next, we're going to go over to our movie count by studio name, and we're going to copy over some of our formatting. You'll notice that all I did was I clicked on this chart. I grabbed my paintbrush tool here, copied over some of the formatting. It's not like I'm necessarily going to keep all of the same formatting options, but it speeds up some of my formatting if I just go ahead and use my paintbrush tool to copy over some of the basics. So now I'm going to focus on just cleaning up this movie count by studio name. Since it already says movie counts by studio, let's go ahead and give this a better title. Let's see, which studios have produced the most films? I'm going to go ahead and shrink down my titles a little bit more to give my visuals room to breathe. Since I'm already asking the question which studios have produced the most movies, in my opinion, the x-axis title is now a little bit redundant. Now I'm going to go to my bars here. I'm going to change their spacing to, let's see how 30 looks. Basically, I'm just trying to get skinnier bars here, so I'm adjusting the padding a little bit. I think that's looking pretty good. I'm even going to do the same thing on my first chart here. Whoops. Next, I really want my y-axis labels here to have a little bit more room to breathe. So I'm going to go to my y-axis. I'm going to play with this max area width a little bit to see what it looks like if I just kind of bump this up a little bit. That's not too bad. The bar chart's starting to get a little bit scrunched. That's to be expected. But we can make it a little bit wider since this bar chart doesn't take up much space at all. Next, I'm going to go back to my bars. I'm going to make sure that I have a nice gradient color scheme over here as well. This time I am going to use movie count. I'm going to use the middle value instead of a custom value since we're no longer dealing with ratings. Pretty happy with how that looks. Notice here that I'm starting to get some, warnings that it's becoming more difficult for Power BI to format some of the elements in this visual because I've made it so small. This is an easy error to get around. All I'm going to do is I'm going to grab my bar charts here. I'm going to go to my properties and I'm going to turn off the responsive setting for these bar charts. I typically recommend that people turn off the responsive setting. I hate the responsive setting for visuals in Power BI. The responsive setting just dynamically changes things like font size and spacing within the visual based on how large you make it. It's intended to create less work for you, but honestly, it just makes more work if you're someone like me that likes for everything to look good. So I'm going to go ahead and head to my last bar chart here. I'm going to go ahead and get rid of any unnecessary information here like movie count. So I'm going to delete the title from my y-axis. I'm going to go to my column options, make sure that movie count is the formula that's being evaluated for my conditional formatting. Pretty happy with how that looks. You can change this to how many films are in the data by rating. Looks like the majority of the films are either rated R or not rated at all. And I'm not surprised that NC-17, which is the most mature rating, seems to have by far the smallest number of films represented. Okay, so now I have a chart down here that just kind of sums up how many movies were released by year. I do want to format this one a little bit differently because you can see there's so many items crammed into this that the data labels aren't particularly helpful. So I'm going to go ahead and turn off my data labels. I'm going to turn my y-axis back on, and I'm going to remove the title from my y-axis. I'm going to go to my grid lines. I'm going to get rid of the vertical grid lines so that all I've got are the horizontal grid lines. And I'm going to go back to my x-axis options. I am going to turn a title back on here, even though it is pretty obvious that these are years. I'm just going to go ahead and change this title to Year of Theatrical Release to make it a little bit easier for someone to know what is going on in this visual. If you'll remember, behind the scenes, I have a date table, and it is connected to my main data set on in theaters date. So this is the number of films based on their theatrical release. Let's go ahead and look at our columns, make sure that the conditional formatting is updated correctly from average RT score to movie count. Hit OK. And now you can see very plainly, that it looks like more and more films really started to be released, in the last 25 years or so. Started to kind of increase in the 1980s. And now, we have so many films that are released, and it looks like it sort of started to plateau in around the 2010s. So let's go ahead and give this chart a more descriptive title. How many films have been theatrically released since whatever our first data point is, 1914. We can decrease the title size there. That's looking pretty good for a very simple report. Let's go ahead and just run with that for now. Next, we're going to go to our genres tab and start kind of cleaning this up. Now from here, our pages are going to start to get a lot simpler. I deliberately put a lot of visuals on this, including cards and some bar charts. But for the rest of this, we're only going to focus on just 3 or 4 visuals. So notice, I've got another bar chart here. If you want to save yourself some time, you can always grab a visual from another page and copy it over, just so you can steal the formatting and save yourself some time. Pretty happy with how that's looking. I'm going to go to my data labels. I'm going to change my values to display more units. I'm going to give this a more descriptive title. How many films have been released by genre? Since these 2 visuals are identical, I'm going to format them at the same time by just hitting Control Select. Here, I'm actually going to remove the legend. I'm going to change up my my labels to just show the data value. I only want to show the actual score. I'm not really particularly interested in showing too many decimal places, but hey, let's just, since on an average these can have some decimal places, as you saw, the one measure goes all the way out. Let's go ahead and allow this to show 2 decimal places. The next thing that I'm going to do is I am going to change up my actual slices in these donut charts a little bit. Gonna decrease the radius size, just gonna make it 80. Gonna make these a little bit wider. If you want to make sure they're exactly the same size, just multi-select, go into your width options and resize them there. Next, I'm going to go to my effects, turn on my visual border, grab a gray color and make 10 pixel rounded corners, the same as almost everything else in the report. Next, I'm going to go in and change the title of this to what score on average did critics give these films. I'm going to decrease this so it fits on one line. Looks like 12 font is as much as I can go. And the next one I'm going to call, and it looks like I've got a typo. Keep playing with the sizing a little bit so that I can fit hopefully the entire title on one line. It doesn't really matter if the visuals are exactly the same size, but let me go ahead and fix the typo that I had in the title of my first donut chart here. That's looking pretty good. Now I'm just going to go ahead and try to make my table here as large as I can to really fully occupy that space. I'm going to go ahead and take care of the background and visual border first. Next, I'm going to go ahead and format this as much as possible so that somebody could, quickly go through here and leave with the right information. So let's go ahead and format this to keep it as simple as possible. I'm going to go ahead and remove the alternating rows. I'll go ahead and keep the grid lines or the horizontal lines between each movie just for readability. I'm going to go up to my grid options and get rid of the blue border that appears between all of the different items. I think I'm comfortable going ahead and spotlighting my totals here at the bottom. So I'm going to go to my total settings for the table. I'm going to go ahead and make that purple, make the text white. And I'm going to try to do everything that I can to get all of this table to sort of fit into this space without a scroll bar. There are some pretty easy steps that we can take. Let's go ahead and change average audience score to average odd score. That immediately gives us some space back. And we can even change audience count to audience count. This allows us to even make our movie titles a little bit more focused on. I'm going to go to my column headers. I'm going to specify that I want all of my columns aligned to the center. This is just a personal preference. If you want to make your columns a little bit larger, you can, but of course it's going to just take up a little bit more space. I'm actually just going to leave it as a 10 for now. Next, if you want to look at some of your specific titles, let's look at audience count and see if we can get rid of some of the display units. Notice that we have like almost 2.5 billion audience members. Let's go ahead and do what we did before and drop this down to millions to save a little bit of space there. We can make our movie titles even a little bit larger. Next, if you see something in the data that you think might be worth spotlighting, like RT score versus audience score, this is also a great place to go ahead and add some additional conditional formatting. So let's go to our cell elements for this table. Let's go to our average RT score and turn on background colors. Obviously, the blues that are coming up here are Power BI's default colors. They're not the palette that we chose for ourselves. So let's go ahead and change the formatting options here to pull from our own color palette. You can see a lot of it's orange. We've probably got a pretty wide scale here. If we want to change up the scaling a little bit, we can also say, hey, don't add any formatting at all until we've gotten to at least 80. That's going to take out some of the coloring there. It might also be interesting to also add some conditional formatting to our audience score to make it easier for somebody to sort of eyeball that table and see, how closely did critics and audiences actually agree on movies that were good. Like if you'll notice here, looks like here's a movie, maybe the first Spider-Man movie. It looks like the average critical score for it was a 90 out of 100, but it looks like audiences only gave it a 67. So, it at least makes it a little bit easier for somebody to scroll through here and see, where critics and audiences maybe disagreed on which movies were really good out of that the most people saw. Because at the moment, this table is sorted by audience count. The great thing about including a table like this is if somebody wanted to sort everything by average RT score or average audience score, they can very easily do that. And then, of course, we're intending for people to sort of, click on drama or action and adventure. We want people clicking on these genres in order to consume this information a little bit more quickly. Last thing that we might want to do, is add additional information to these donut charts if we feel like it. We could also go in just very quickly and grab our average audience score or average audience score measure. I'm actually going to get rid of the background entirely. I'm going to drop the font here down to, let's try 25. I'm going to get rid of my category label. I'm going to make this kind of purple here. I'm going to put that in the middle of my donut chart. I'm going to do the same thing with my audience score, or with my RT score. That way, if we're intending for these donut charts to be compared for each genre, as somebody clicks through here, they can more easily see any differences between the critical score and the audience scores for a given genre. Since I've already built 2 pages of this, I'm going to go ahead and save it real fast. And then we'll turn our attention to the directors, actors, and writers pages, which again are all going to be fairly similar, pretty quick for us to go through and reformat. So let's go ahead and head over to our directors page. And we've got quite a few visuals here, and some require a lot more space than others. We've got exactly the same 2 donut charts and tables that we've already formatted previously. So what I'm going to do is I'm just literally going to delete all of this because these donut charts and this table are identical to what we already formatted on our genres page. So I'm just going to go ahead and pop back over here. I'm going to grab these visuals just by control selecting. I'm going to copy them and I'm going to repaste them onto this page. Looks like I must have missed my cards that I overlaid on top of my donut charts, so those are. One thing I'm noticing is that I now have a visual here, this decomposition tree, that it doesn't look like I'm going to have room to fit on this page anymore. So what I'm going to do is I'm literally just going to take this visual and I'm just going to leave it on my testing area page. I can always revisit that visual later on, but I'm probably going to need to conserve space by using something like bookmarks in order to show that visual. So now let's go ahead and turn our attention back over here to the one visual on this page that isn't yet formatted. First, let's go ahead and give this a more descriptive title. So, which directors have made the most films? And how do their average scores compare? We're also going to want to update our legend and make sure that everything is working correctly in our legend. So I'm going to go ahead and give some of these some new titles. So film count, average critical score, average audience score, and RT threshold. And I'm going to resize it a little bit just so it fits as much space as possible. So now, what are some of the things that we want to do to reformat this visual? Obviously, when I changed the color palette, some of the original formatting was lost. You can see that several of the items in our legend all are gray, which means it's going to be very, very difficult to tell them apart within the visual itself. So there are definitely some updates that we need to make here. Since I think the director names are pretty self-explanatory, I'm noticing a typo in my title. Let me go ahead and get rid of that nasty capitalized O and compare. I no longer need director on my title here. This is, or on my x-axis title. This is probably the most obvious item that we've got. So let's go ahead and get rid of the x-axis title. We know that since those are people, those must be the directors. Over here, we've got quite a bit going on because there are actually 3 lines in this chart, but they all amount to effectively the same thing. So let's go ahead and change our y-axis title to average score. Whoops, looks like I got the wrong one. So that is, the problem was that I just updated the y-axis over here, which should be film count. Now it says film count. Let's go ahead and go to our secondary y-axis and change the title there to average score. Hopefully to keep things just a little bit simpler. Next, I need to go and fix my lines here to make it easier for people to compare the average critical score and the average audience score. I'm going to go ahead and give new colors to the lines. So let me go ahead and play with my colors a little bit here. Since I'm comparing two things that are pretty difficult to read, I want to make sure that I am choosing colors that are easy for a user to distinguish between. So I'm going to go with purple and orange. And I'm actually going to get rid of the lines entirely, or at least shrink them down quite a bit. So, but I'm going to have to do this one at a time. Let's focus first on average critical score, which you can see I'm using kind of this orange for. I'm going to go ahead and drop my line width down quite a bit. I'm going to kind of experiment here a little bit. Kind of liked dotted more. That's not looking too bad. Let's go ahead and change our average audience score. Let's drop the stroke width of that down to 2. Let's make sure that these colors are also matching okay. That's looking pretty decent. And our RT fresh threshold, we can just go ahead and leave that gray since it's there more for comparison purposes than anything else. But notice I need to update the color of the markers on my average score lines. So let's go ahead and open up our markers. First, we're going to want to update our average critical score and use the same orange there. If you want to shrink down the marker size a little bit, it might make it a little bit easier to compare. Let's set our average audience score to the same purple that we're using. This is starting to look a little bit better. And if you want to add a series label or something to make it a little bit easier to know what this RT fresh threshold is, that might be helpful. I think that for the average critical score, we don't need it. We can read this from our legend. For the average audience score, same thing. But I am going to leave the RT fresh threshold turned on for 60. And I'm going to see if I can just make this a little bit larger. We can always scrunch the visuals over here as needed. Drag these into place, drop them down there, and I'm just kind of eyeballing this to make sure that they're roughly centered. I'm going to scrunch my movie titles in a little bit. Doesn't matter if these end up taking up multiple lines. And since, things have become a little bit tiny, maybe a little bit difficult to read, this is also a great time to go through our x-axis properties, maybe see if we can make some of the names a little bit larger since they're important. We can also make our y-axis labels a little bit larger so that they're easier to read. If you want to play with different fonts, that's fine. Since our film counts are kind of a light gray, I'm actually going to lighten up the gray in my axis label and title as well, just to sort of reflect that. And then on my secondary y-axis, I'm going to steal kind of the same theme by taking the purple color from these lines to sort of tie that thread together. So that now we can go through and look at any of these directors, see how many films they've produced, and also see dynamically the difference in critical scores versus audience scores for any given director. Some people that I know in the data viz world would say, do we really need the connecting line at all, since it implies continuity between these markers? I think that that's a very valid point. Since there is no real continuity here, the way that we would, see in like a line chart showing a metric over time, if you were of the mind to sort of play with removing the line entirely between these different items, I would understand the impulse to want to remove the connecting lines. In my opinion, for a visual like this, where we've got a lot going on, it may just make it a little bit easier to sort of track and compare, but technically the connecting lines between any of the given directors are probably not necessary. So I'm going to go ahead and leave that as is, just to sort of illustrate that there are often multiple ways to effectively visualize a concept. Without the lines, that even gives you a little bit more leeway to increase the actual size of the markers. So if we were looking at, for example, Spike Lee, we can obviously just click on him, and his the data points that represent the different scores are obviously spotlighted now compared to everything else. Or if we did the same with Ridley Scott, and you can see that as I'm interacting with these visuals like Martin Scorsese, everything over here is filtering as well. So it looks like, critics on average give Martin Scorsese's films higher scores than audiences do, but overall they're pretty close. And if we're looking for films where audiences and critics, really disagreed, Casino stands out. Looks like audiences loved it. They gave it a 93 out of 100. Average critical score was only 80. Whereas it looks like for The Aviator, critics liked the film quite a bit more than audiences did. So, it at least helps us tell the story of Martin Scorsese a little bit clearer. So, if we go to the actors and writers pages, of course, again, we see a lot of repetition here. And so this is another, great area where we can save some time by just sort of reusing what we've already worked on. So I'm going to go ahead and finish this visual by going to my effects. I'm going to leave my background turned on. I'm going to give it a visual border that matches the rest of our report. Go ahead and drag that out a little bit more as we approach the 1 hour mark. I'm going to go ahead and just literally copy all of these visuals, because it's going to be faster than just reformatting everything on every single page. I'm going to go ahead and paste my visuals here. And I'm going to go ahead and remove this director filter. I'm going to remove director from this chart entirely, and I'm going to add actor to it. And I'm going to go in really quickly, and I'm going to remove the blank values from my actor table. I'm going to add another filter to remove junior, which was created, as a result of parsing and unpivoting our actor names. Because if you'll remember, all of these visuals are going to interact almost exactly the same way. For some reason, my cards did not come over yet again, but that's no big deal. Go ahead and drag those cards into place. And now we're getting basically the exact same effect for our actors that we had for our directors on the previous page. So again, we're trying to work smarter, not harder. And to sort of round this out, we're going to do exactly the same thing with our writers. I'm going to grab all of my visuals here. I'm going to copy and paste. And I'm noticing that it looks like my cards are coming over, but it looks like they're getting layered to the background for some reason. Not really sure why that is, but it's not a huge deal. I'm just going to go ahead and delete one of the cards. Let's go ahead and send our donut chart here to the back. There are my excess cards. I'm just going to delete one. Now I'm going to go to my visual here. I'm going to add writer instead of actor to these charts. I'm going to get rid of my actor filters. You'll notice that I've got a huge blank here for where writer is not filled out for some of these movies. Obviously, I don't want to include those values, so I'm just going to remove blank values. I've also got junior here, which is no problem. Just going to go ahead and filter that out and apply. And the last thing that I need to do, obviously, is go through and update my titles to say writers instead of directors, or actors instead of directors. And now, it only took about an hour to turn our fairly, basic, ugly, barely fleshed out Power BI report into something that I feel like we could all be relatively proud putting in front of stakeholders, putting in front of a customer. I feel like it's going to enable, anybody to approach this data in a very logical manner based on, which specific item in the data they're interested in exploring, and be able to quickly, filter through any specific actors or writers or directors and view their entire filmography, while also comparing, what audiences and critics thought of the different movies in each person's filmography. Got a nice landing and summary page here that sort of sums up everything and kind of points us in the direction of how many movies are in the data set, average scores, trends over time. So the only thing that's left now is to really think hard about what are some additional features or functionality that we could add to this using other Power BI features to sort of make this a more interactive experience. Because at the moment, users can go through here and they can click on different visuals, but there's not a whole lot else that they can do. This is all just sort of a summary. There's some nice aesthetics and stuff going on here, but there are no slicers that a user could use to slice up this data. There's no navigation options that someone could use to sort of jump between pages. So in the next video, I'm just going to take about 30 minutes to add some additional little things to this, just to make it a little bit more exciting. We might do some drill through pages, some bookmarks, some tooltips, other things that Power BI Desktop has right out of the box that can just make this a little bit more interactive and help you keep your report users a little bit more engaged. So I'll see you over there in the next video. Thanks so much for checking this out. I know this was kind of a long one, but hopefully you find some of these design tips useful.